Hey, howdy, and welcome to the Big and Bright Podcast. My name is Nick. This here next to me is James.
Howdy.
Guys, it's not much has changed since the last we spoke. We took a little bit of a hiatus off because of something called the bar exam or something like that.
Yeah, some idiot decided to take it.
And then I was ill, and I also have a child, so I needed to stop and take care of him. We promised to keep those sorts of things to a minimum, but last week was kind of a special situation. But in that time, we figured there would be so much progress. We both assumed, I think, that the Democrats would come back.
Mm-hmm.
Nope. They're still there. They're still.
Do you know what? Two of them decided to fly off to vacation as well.
I believe it.
But reports are just reports. They're not actually truth. Okay.
100% believe that they're still up there sipping Miller Lite in their penthouse suites with their Democrat buddies in Congress. They're not. It's not going to work. I mean, it's fairly evident at this point that they're not going to get to the votes that they need to pass H.R. 1. So now they're just hanging out there for no reason.
Well, Abbott's doing another one.
Yep, Abbott's called another special session. I don't know who could have predicted that. Called another special session. So once they get back, we will be doing this again. This is all going to be a moot point, and it's just going to be something that we get to poke at you in the next election, Democrats. And so, by all means, at this point, stay. It's going to get done regardless.
I think we should both be campaign managers because we really have to do no work. All we do is say, hey, just play the video that they willingly posted themselves.
That is true.
It's awesome.
But when we had our episode where we talked about the Democrats leaving, I made a promise. I said, we're going to be here, and we're going to be talking about everything that you're not doing while you're not doing it. And so we're going to start that session today, that series today, about talking about things that are on this docket that the Democrats are deliberately avoiding. And one of them is something that I have a kind of special and near and dear to my heart, and I'll explain why here in just a little bit.
Yep.
A little thing called CRT, critical race theory, and whether it's taught in schools and whether it should be taught in schools. Now, James, do you know anything about the specifics of the law that's on the docket now for this special session with regard to CRT? Or
a portion of it has been passed that was passed in the regular session. However, there was a more amended version to really focus on K through 12 for the special session. That passed the Senate, but it didn't pass the House.
Because the House doesn't have quorum.
Because the House doesn't exist right now.
Because the Democrats left, right? So they're avoiding this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is being taken care of on the local level to a certain degree. A lot of local school boards have already said, no, this is not happening. But I think there would be some value to Texas coming out and saying, no, this is a statewide thing.
Right.
I don't care if you're in Austin. I don't care if you're in downtown Dallas, right? You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed
it's
to throw
their
this out
public school. They have a right to say, you'll stay in this lane,
Very much
period.
so.
Because if you don't, they make it a private school.
You're talking about the education of our kids. And that's another thing that's pointed out is that nothing here says anything about private school.
No, because it's your own school. We are not funding it.
That's true. If I homeschool my kid, I can teach him whatever I want.
Yep.
If I want to teach him critical race theory, which I won't because it's garbage, and we'll talk about that here in just a bit.
Whoa, let the cat out of the bag there.
Yeah, it is trash. It is intellectual trash. And this is the thing. I do disagree with critical race theory on an ideological level. But if it disagreed with me on an ideological level, but there was some academic merit to it, we'd be having a different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
My key issue with critical race theory is that just from an academic perspective, from a historical perspective, from a legal perspective, and we'll get James's opinion on that here in just a second, it's garbage. None of it is based in any sort of factual merit. We sort of try to pretend that it is, and I'll explain kind of how we do that. There's a lot of semantics that goes on around critical race theory as far as what exactly it does and what it teaches. But it's odd to me, right? Because and we're going to get here in just a second. We're going to talk about specifically what it is. But let's talk first about what it's not.
Oh,
because it's
not.
It's odd to me because here's the thing. What you always hear is, well, why are you so worried about critical race theory? Critical race theory is just X, and then they'll give some sort of harmless statement about it. It's just affirming that black people are people, right?
Yeah, the definitions constantly change.
And then they say, well, it's not a big deal. Why are you so mad about it? And my response is, if it's not a big deal, why are you so mad about it?
Yeah, it seems like, you were rallying about this whole thing for like an hour with some crowd. Mm-hmm. Well, why are you focused on that? Because you're a political opponent, especially if a certain side is the one manifesting all this, Democrats. Well, then if it wasn't a big deal, you wouldn't be having rallies for it.
But what you always hear about critical race theory is that it's history, right? It's just teaching history, warts and all. I think we had a representative said that. It's just teaching history, warts and all.
Yeah.
Here's the thing about CRT. CRT actually isn't a historical discipline.
No.
CRT is not something you would teach in a history class.
No.
CRT is actually a philosophy of law. It started with guys like Derek Bell and Gene Stefanchik and Richard Delgado in Harvard Law School. That's typically where it was taught. And so that's another thing you'll hear is, the CRT is not being taught in public schools. That's a legal theory. Yes, that's true.
In a way.
We aren't teaching CRT, and I actually did put this, right? CRT is currently not taught explicitly in U.S. schools. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, there's no class where someone says, hey, we're going to pull out our critical race theory textbook, and we're going to learn about what critical race theory is.
That'd be the biggest waste of money to buy this textbook.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Because it just constantly changes. It's like, oh, sorry, take that page out. We no longer like this guy. We like this girl instead.
Not to mention the fact, but, Richard Delgado and Gene Stefanchik, who wrote the, Critical Race Theory, An Introduction, which is a book, by the way, that I've got on my shelves. It's this thick, and it's dense legal language. For the most part, right? It's
just like when politicians write a certain bill in a weird way, like, what does that even mean? It's like their job retention. That's what they're doing.
Oh, trust me. We'll talk about language here in a little bit. Because language is the crux on which this whole thing rests, I promise. But the thing is yes, it is not explicitly taught, but that doesn't mean that it's not influencing.
Being taught?
Yeah, that doesn't mean it's not being taught, right? Because a lot of our premises in things like how we teach history, in things like how we teach, English class, the specific literature that we choose to.
I even saw an article from Texas Tribune. It was 6 or 7 teachers. They talked to 24 at least across the state of Texas. Okay.
Yeah.
But they found the ones that looked the most woke and said the most woke things, and that's the ones who ended up being in the article.
That's true.
But they were like, I'm so afraid of what I can and can't teach. It's like, well, then how are you getting so close to the line?
Yeah.
Like, they're saying all these innocuous things. Like, well, that's not, you can teach that, no problem. But what if someone gets offended? It's like, well, it shouldn't if that's what all you're teaching. Mm-hmm. But likely that's what you're saying you're teaching.
Versus
and it's like, all right,
taught.
yeah, but those sub points all of a sudden get real hard left.
And that's one of the things that we see.
Did you
lot.
know in certain elementary schools they have African American studies in elementary schools, like the class, like what?
Yeah.
What?
No, it makes sense. I mean, it's
whatever.
If you subscribe to basically what critical race theory teaches, it would make sense that you would start indoctrinating at that.
Shocker. Guess where?
In elementary schools in California.
in
Austin,
Dallas, Harris County. Oh, I didn't see that coming.
I believe that 100%. Here's the thing. I already said that CRT is not a history endeavor. It's not a history discipline, but it is. We're using elements of it in our history class, any social science class, right? You're going to, if your teacher subscribes to critical race theory, they're going to be teaching things that are not factually true, like, by the way, the 1619 Project, right?
Yeah, which got changed and altered so many times, but the New York Times already paid $20 million for it, so it has to be legit.
The 1619 Project is not itself critical race theory, but it is a version of American history that Nicole Hannah-Jones, the author of which, has said is heavily influenced by people like Derek Bell, right? Who is the author of critical race theory. And it's garbage, right? And the other thing that people say is that, it's just history. It's just he's teaching history, warts and all. The other thing people say is that it's not actually being taught in elementary schools because it's a legal profession. But, again, the other thing they say is it's just a legal theory, right? Critical race theory is, it's in the name. It's just a theory.
Right.
That's not true.
That's
right?
not how you teach it.
In CRT, an introduction, they define critical race theory not as a theory but a movement. It has an objective. Now, James, I'm going to go ahead and read this description to you. And
I think you need to read it in totality.
This is going to be kind of technical language, but James, I want you to listen to this, and just because, again, you've been studying law for a while now. Does this sound like a purely legal theory to you?
All right.
Okay.
Let's see.
If the task of critical social theory, which, by the way, is the derivative of critical race theory from the Frankfurt School in 1933. If the task of critical social theory is to evaluate the degree of rationality of any system of social domination in accordance to standards of justice, then ideological criticism has the function of unmasking wrong rationalizations of present or past injustices. That is, ideology in the factual and negative sense, such as in the case of belief that women are inferior to men and blacks to whites. Thus, ideological criticism aims at proposing alternative, practicable ways for constructing social bounds. Does that sound like a legal theory to you?
That sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook garbage. It makes no sense. It basically just says like a bunch of things that beg the question, but they don't actually explain anything.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, like the unmasking wrong rationalizations of present or past injustices. All right, what the heck does that mean? What is your definition of an injustice? Is it only specifically to one side, one color, one man or woman? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
You just say it. Okay.
What about proposing alternative, practicable ways for constructing social bounds? Last I checked, legal theories don't construct social bounds.
No, that's a culture thing.
Yeah, and this sounds like a very active political theory. Like, this theory has objectives and things that it's trying to do. Political theories are supposed to be practically neutral, right?
Yeah.
They're supposed to be a lens by which you examine law. But this is something that is actively supposed to be out there in community making change, specifically through education.
Yeah.
So this is actually more of an educational ideology than it is a legal theory. It's sort of masked as a legal theory. Now, what is, and again, let's get into practically what is critical race theory, okay? Critical race theory, and again, this is coming directly out of Delgado and Stefanch's book, right? Which is it's the flagship of critical race theory, right? It has four essential...
Don't worry, those priests will be excommunicated from this church, and they'll have a new priest set aside there.
It's four essential principles, and these are found in the first chapter of the book, right? This is not hard to find, right? First, racism is ordinary, not aberrational. Right? Meaning that if all things are left to their basic devices, that most people are by default racist. Meaning that racism is something, this is where you hear the term a lot, do the work, right? Racist is something that you have to sort of purge from yourself by following certain virtues. Now, here's the thing.
Make certain decrees.
Yeah, here's the thing. I'm a Christian, and I believe that all men are sinful. I believe that all men's hearts are sinful and deceitful, and racism is a part of that. So sure, I will agree that there's definitely a tendency towards evil in the heart of humanity. But to say that racism specifically is aberrational, I do not follow. Because here's the thing: when I was a child, right? I had I harbored a lot of animosity and anger towards a lot of kids that did me wrong in the schoolyard, right?
Yeah.
I definitely had a lot of sin in my heart.
He's got that face you want to punch, though.
Yeah.
I don't blame him.
I definitely had that sin in my heart. Racism was never one of those things.
Yeah. I don't like him, but he's black. I just don't like him.
Yeah.
It's not a black thing.
Most of the kids I didn't like in my school were white kids, right? And black kids.
I grew up with a lot of Hispanics in my area because, like, in that part of East Texas, there was a lot. I didn't hate them for that reason. It was like, no. I don't like you because you just kicked me in the head when I try to play soccer with you.
Racism is a very specific and constructed part of evil. It actually requires... Racism is something that I think has to be learned.
It's such a burden to hold, too.
Yeah, you have to learn about it. And I mean, I tend to quote Morgan Freeman on this. This is Morgan Freeman before he was, a proponent of critical race theory, where he said, if you talk about racism, it exists. Right? How are we going to get rid of racism? We stop talking about it, and that's true. I think. Well, that's true.
He was on Don Lemon's show, like, stop having Black History Month.
Black History Month. Yeah.
And Don Lemon was like,
I think that was Mike Wallace's show, not Don Lemon. Well, he was also on Don Lemon, but that's where he said if you talk about it,
maybe
it
that's when I'm
exists.
getting confused.
No, it was Mike Wallace's show on 60 Minutes where he said stop having Black History Month, right? If you talk about it, it exists. Racism is something that you have to be told exists. Because I'm guaranteeing you right now, kids do not perceive race in that way. They say this person looks different than me, but clearly they're still a human. They still have function faculties and things like that. So I believe that evil is ordinary and not aberrational. That does not necessarily follow that racism is ordinary and aberrational. Okay, the next point, point B, white over color ascendancy serves as an important purpose. Thus, social superstructures exist to maintain that racism. Okay, so essentially this is now saying that, hey, because racism is sort of ingrained in the human psyche, it is therefore ingrained in all of our social psyches, and that means that all superstructures, social superstructures, things like government, things like the educational system, legal system, all this stuff, exist in order to maintain that racism. Now,
which ones?
Exactly.
Which ones?
This is what you have to say. It's like, okay, show me.
Yeah. Democrats hold a lot of power in these agencies.
That's very true.
So
specifically black Democrats.
Yeah,
hold a lot
if it's
of
a
power
bad thing, you're the one who holds the power.
Yeah.
Really?
And I will say that point B is valid given point A being sound.
Like it has to beg it. Like these all has to be true. It's like a law. It has to be elements. If this all doesn't happen, then it's not true.
If point A is actually true, then you could say that
if
point
A
B
then
would
B.
be true. Yeah. But I disagree with the premise of point A. The other thing is, like James says, okay, great. Systems are racist. Point out which one is racist.
Name them. Let's work together. Name them.
But here's the thing. This is where you get into arguments of modern critical theorists, people like Robin DiAngelo and Ibram Kendi, who we will talk about.
So smart people.
Yeah, exactly. Who say anything that results in some sort of disparity is necessarily racist.
I didn't realize you were actually going to say that.
Anything that results
a stupid statement.
Anything that has a disparaging result is racist by default.
Disparate treatment is racist.
Yeah.
That's basically what I had to learn for con law. And it's a trickery one because it writes it in such a way it's like, these people who happen to be in this city who are minorities, it heavily affects them. Is this law constitutional? You read it, it's like, well, yeah, like that. It was neutrally valid, or it's facially neutral, meaning. Here's the easiest way to say it, because they usually try to do it with a religion too. This law doesn't allow, the easiest one is that it doesn't allow the smoking of peyote. Well, there's a case way back when where Native Americans smoked peyote for their religious things.
Yep.
And they said this is actually infringes on religious rights because we do this for our ceremonies. And the Supreme Court said, just because it affects you does not mean it was done specifically to make you stop. Like peyote is a dangerous drug. That's why they wrote it as illegal. Yeah, they can totally put this in.
Yeah.
So just because it treats you differently because you happen to practice something or do these rituals, that's on you. Too bad, so sad.
Yeah.
This isn't racist. This isn't against your religion. Nothing.
Yep.
But it doesn't matter. That's not how they think now.
That is the thing. And if you can say that that's what racism is, and by the way, all of CRT and especially all the modern literature on CRT relies on simply defining racism into existence.
Yeah.
Right. It'd be like saying white people. White people existing is racism. Therefore, racism is everywhere.
Well, I agree with that statement.
Well, but that's the thing is you've defined racism in such a way as to allow it to be everywhere, and then you operate on that premise.
Yeah, everything always somehow gets a racist, no matter what it is. It's like, and here we go back. Like, oh wow, your definition somehow always loops back to racism.
Now I'm going to read C and D at the same time.
Uh-oh.
Right? Because I'm going to point something out about C and D. Okay, so C is very simple.
Okay.
Race is a social construct.
Okay.
D, race is the lens through which we should view society and justice. Minorities possess a unique competence in discussion of racial inequity. So,
wait,
this thing that is a social construct and doesn't actually exist,
it's all in our minds,
is the lens with which we should view all of society.
Well, that's sound logic.
Despite so this thing that isn't a thing is the thing that is everything.
It's almost like some of the LGB LMNOPs. It's like, gender is a social construct, yet transgenderism is real. It's like, well, how is
transgenderism real if gender isn't real, right?
Like and it's always some fancy little words. Like they'll put this gobbledygook, like you read earlier. Yeah. They'll put that, and it's like, come on, if you can't read that, then you're just not smart. I guess I'm not smart because you just don't make sense.
No, this is not me not being smart. This is you not making sense
on purpose.
That's a very real thing.
Constantly not answering the question, being a politician.
I think so. That's the thing. First of all, I got a real problem with C. Race is a social construct.
Yeah,
no,
okay.
It absolutely isn't.
There
are elements of race that are social, like race carrying with it certain cultures. That's a social construct. Right?
Yeah.
Race, as in
the human
ethnic
race?
lineage, is not a social construct.
No.
It's just the way that human beings.
I can literally see another person. It's like different colors to me. It's like I can look down and go, well, I know I'm white.
Yep.
You're a different color. You're not white. Does that mean anything?
Well,
no, I just noticed a difference. That's it.
Then there's a place. Well, skin color has nothing to do with race. No, also not true. But
tell it to Rachel Dolezal.
Yeah,
all right, she got kicked out real quick.
Yeah. Race is the lens. Yeah, that's a good case. Rachel Dolezal. If race is a social construct,
why was
if
Rachel
I choose
Dolezal
to socially construct myself,
why
in
was
this
she
way,
kicked out? Well, because she lied that she had black brothers, a black family, and she was the head of I think it was Chicago's NAACP. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but she identified as black, so what's the big deal?
Yeah.
Well, because she's not truly black. Whoa. You just said it's a social construct. She was part of that social construct. She identified and did things as a black woman.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Okay.
Because that was 5 years ago or so, however long it was.
So that's what critical race theory is, right? It's a theory based out of the Frankfurt School, right? The 1933.
The Marxist Frankfurt School.
Yes, it is a Marxist theory.
What did they change the name to? Do you know?
I do not know.
Frankfurt School.
Yeah, it was just called the Frank. Yeah,
Oh, I wonder why you dropped that first name.
Well, the Marxist Frankfurt School, basically it deals in the fact that we need to be critical, this is where the critical comes from, critical of all social constructs, that being
basically
things
Nietzsche.
like, capitalism, economics, right? Just be critical of everything.
It's just a reiteration of Nietzsche, question everything.
And they would obviously take that because they're Marxists. They actually took that on an economic level. It's like everything is meant to oppress the poor, and we should be critical of it in that way. Critical race theory just took the word poor and replaced it with black. That's it's an
and then sold
admittedly
a lot of books. I mean,
Yeah.
you gotta admit, you can say what you want to about America. Capitalism works because you were able to make a lot of money by just saying like Control F, change.
admittedly oversimplified, but that is basically what it is. But now we have modern authors, right, who are taking this and really expanding on it in some serious ways.
These are good writers.
Yeah. And one of them is, we've talked about Robin DiAngelo a little bit. She wrote a book, White Fragility, which is unreadable. It is just such ham-handed nonsense.
Yeah.
But the one that I actually read, and let it never be said that I don't do my homework, guys. I read this book so y'all didn't have to.
Yeah, he would tell me about this during our workouts we do in the morning, and I was like, I feel so bad for you.
But I read a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. I read it twice. How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Are you succeeding?
By Ibram X. Kendi. No. I'm
Oh,
not.
wow.
Why? You want to know why? Because I'm white, and I, according to Kendi, cannot succeed.
That doesn't matter then.
I have to continually do the work, right? That being said, Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is absolute trash.
Garbage.
It really is. It's I can't explain it. I've never seen somebody so eloquently sling bull. You know what I mean? I've never seen somebody and Kendi, for what it's worth, I mean, his prose and writing style it's beautiful. It's very poetic. It sounds nice to read, but it's all garbage, right?
Well,
he's just
basically
slinging nonsense.
If you're kind of on the line about, I kind of align with this kind of thinking, it literally is a great propaganda book to read to really solidify that, like, yes, I am officially on this side.
Yeah. And if you take the base premise of Delgado and Stefanczyk and you expand on it, you get into some really loopy territory.
It's a heck of a premise.
That's kind of where Kendi exists, right? Now, here's the thing about Kendi's book. It's actually not a book about CRT. There's definitely elements of CRT in it, and he certainly cites a lot of authors of critical race theory. But it's really a book more about intersectionality than critical race theory. Now, intersectionality is the theory that there are several different ways that one can be oppressed, right? You might be able to be oppressed because you're part of the alphabet people, or because you're black, or because you're native, or because
you're a ginger.
or you're sorry.
We are oppressed.
You don't
people,
subscribe to that, right? Or you're a woman or whatever, and the intersections of those oppressions exist in a specific identity. So it's a way. Yeah, no, I'm going to let that slide right by, right? It is essentially a way to extract individualism out of collectivism.
Yeah.
Marxism is an inherently collectivist ideology, but by using intersectionality, you can sort of see how you get to individualism. If you say, well, I'm not just a black person, I'm a black, queer, trans, disabled lesbian. Veteran, yeah.
Like added them all.
With
I'm oppressed.
With an aneurysm, right? I mean, and so like that is sort of how you get to something examining individuality.
God,
right?
some of these. Sorry, side note. Some of these freaking oppressive things, like. Sometimes I see the color pink, I get really nervous, and so for you to wear a pink shirt is oppressive to me. It's like, oh my gosh, like how technical. Like we're literally in this amazing country that you can find the smallest things to be like, that's a little trigger for me.
Sorry, I don't even care. I don't care
no,
at
get
that
out
point.
of here.
The book is about intersectionality, and I can say this because the chapters that are even listed. There's a chapter called Space, right? There's a chapter called
Space.
There's a chapter called
What's between the ears.
Yeah, there's a chapter called Gender. There's a chapter about LGBTQ.
Alphabet soup, whatever.
Yeah, it's about the alphabet people, right? There's a chapter about poverty, right? There's a lot of stuff in here, and it's so weird. there's a lot of stuff in here that Kendi is not talking about race, but he chooses to put the word black in front of everything to make it seem like he's like, this is what it looks like. This is what black poverty looks like. No, you're not talking about black poverty. You're just talking about poverty, right? It's like, oh, this is what black lesbianism looks like. No, you're just talking about lesbianism. There's nothing about anything that he says that makes it uniquely black, except for he chooses to put the word black in front of all things that he deems as noteworthy, and he puts white in front of all things that he deems reprehensible, right? So he just puts those words in front, and it makes it seem like he's talking about racial issues, but he's not. He's talking about gender. He
has his own premise.
It's a book.
He's like, I already have my conclusion. I'm just going to find a lot of weird anecdotes to make my point, which I already wanted to come to.
It's a book about leftist intersectionality that's masked in race.
No.
Sorry. Yeah. And then here's the thing. Kendi is a perfect example of somebody who decided that it wasn't worth taking basic Western logic or, Western philosophy or logic in favor of taking something like, Somali transracial disabled dance theory, right? The guy does not understand basic
I'd take that class.
Right?
I'd get an A.
The book itself is one of two things. It's either a bunch of nonsensical banal platitudes, or it is basically it's non sequiturs and red herrings all taping together just a mountain of completely fallacious assumptions.
Now, what the heck does that mean? You're going to talk about vagueness earlier. You got to spit out your vagueness now? Come on.
Kendi does one of two things in his book, okay? And every chapter seems to include one of these two elements. A story that he tells about his life, about something that made him uncomfortable, which generally includes a lot of subjective assumptions. For example, in one of the stories in the book, he tells a fact about this girl who doesn't often raise her hand. She's a shy girl, and this is in elementary school, right? And Kendi talks about she raised her hand one time, and the teacher called instead on a white student.
Oh my gosh!
This
country needs drastic changes.
Kendi from that assumes and wants you to assume that this teacher did that because of race, right? And he uses this as an anecdote to market specific oppression in modern America. So that's basically what I mean by banal platitude, right? It's banal platitudes.
You're picking anecdotes and saying it has to mean this.
Right.
Okay.
Platitude is basically just a common phrase, right? Like, absence make the heart grow fonder. That's a platitude, right?
Yeah.
And anecdotes is stories. So he either does that, or he uses certain logical fallacies. The most common one that he uses.
If this is true, then this also has to be true. It's like, well, I don't agree with the first if. Like that. Hold on. Wait.
The most common of those is the non sequitur. Non sequitur basically means it does not follow. Right.
Yeah.
Perfect example is the one that I just used. Right. He tells another story about his father. Right. His father his father is at a rally or something, listening to a white speaker, and he looks at Ibram Kendi and says, "If I was up there saying that, I would be arrested." Doesn't follow. Sorry, you're going to need some evidence there.
It's kind of like Joe Biden's stories from past. Like, I'm sure this didn't happen. It's kind of making something up here.
And everything in his book is ultimately that. It's you have to believe his base premise, which is that racism is everywhere. Racism is the thread that weaves.
Everybody thinks about race that way.
Yeah, and everybody thinks about race that way, and that's not true. And unless you assume that premise, the book makes no sense. And everything is ultimately a non sequitur because you haven't proven your base premise here. Okay? What does he do? What does Kendi do? He constantly begs the question, which is what I just said. To beg the question is not to ask a question. A lot of people think begging the question is asking a question.
Yeah.
Begging the question is actually a logical term that means to assume your own premise.
Yeah.
Right? AKA everything that I've mentioned before.
Right,
Kendi assumes the premise of racism.
Right.
Ergo, everything.
And a good example of that would be like if you're at a Bible study and you start saying like, well, as we all know, God did blank blank. And it's like, yeah, if you're there at the Bible study, we're all on the same plane and we believe in God. So that's be begging the question. Like, I'm just going to assume we all agree on this part and move on instead of having to get like affirmative yeses from everybody, or you wouldn't be here if you didn't all agree that God.
This is a good example from the book, and I've got a couple of quotes that I pulled out of this book.
So sad you had to read it twice.
This is a textbook example. I read it twice by choice.
Oh.
This is a textbook example because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't lying.
Well,
right?
I mean, Nick, it's your body, your choice.
So this is a quote from the book. Quote, one of racism's harms is the way it falls on the unexceptional black person who is asked to be extraordinary just to survive, and even worse, the black screw-up who faces the abyss after one error, while the white screw-up is handed second chances and empathy.
Who? When?
That
What?
is such an unbelievable begging the question. You are asking us to assume
If
that
I already
this is
think
true.
Whitey's bad, then yeah, that's true. Whitey's
You're asking
bad.
us to assume this is true. And you're asking us also to assume that white people don't also face that exact same thing, i.e. the idea of you need to be extraordinary in order to survive. I don't know about you, but I've been running my own business for the past 5 years, right? You need to be extraordinary in order to survive in that market or you won't have a job.
I'm a redneck
right?
from East Texas that's first-generation law student. Yeah, I've been
Be
there.
extraordinary in order to survive. You're assuming that white people are always handed second chances and empathy. Not true. And you're also assuming that black people always need to be exceptional in order to survive. I don't think that's true either. Now, I think there are exceptional black people, and they should be lauded in the same way that exceptional people in general should be lauded.
Yeah, but no,
that doesn't mean
everything
that you have
is such
to be
a race thing.
exceptional.
If it's a black person doing something really big, it's like the first black person. It's like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, but is that the only thing they are as a black person?
And this is what begging the question is. You are asking us to just assume you're correct. You don't need to provide evidence because you assume your own premise. Now, the next thing that he does, he is intentionally vague. Intentionally vague. Now, we just read that quote from Stefanchik's book, right?
Yeah.
And you said that was a bunch of gobbledygook. Listen to this. This is a quote. This is a quote from How to Be an Anti-Racist, right? This is great. Okay. Now this is actually the beginning of chapter 1. This is the sort of this is the sort
right
of
out the gate.
You know how like you have the chapter and then there'll be like a quote underneath it.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of about what the chapter is. Okay. So
Is this what this is?
that's what this is,
Okay.
right? Racist. One who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inaction or expressing a racist idea. Anti-racist. One who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing anti-racist ideas.
Is that it?
That's it. That's the whole thing.
Wait, how do I know what? What's a racist?
Exactly. Police officer. One who performs the job and functions
As
of a police officer. Like,
Thank you. Finally, someone's saying the right ideas here.
a white person.
Get
A
outta here.
person who is white.
Oh, thanks. Cleared that
Okay,
up.
you haven't defined anything. You haven't done anything there. You've just said X is X and Y is
I thought you were just
Y.
like a pregnant pause. I didn't
No,
realize that was
there's
the
no
other
pregnant
quote.
pause there. That's the end. You say X is X and Y is Y. No further qualifications needed.
Makes sense.
That is such intentionally vague language, right? And the further thing, well, he explains in the chapter. No, he doesn't. He doesn't explain it. The rest of the chapter is just stories and non sequiturs. It's just him making claims about
in that
racism.
whole book, does he actually define racism?
No, that's his definition of racism.
Oh
It's
my
someone who
gosh.
supports racist policies and racist ideas.
What's it? Okay.
Yeah.
If it's a thing for whitey, then it's racist.
That's his definition. And that's the definition that he assumes and uses
golly.
throughout the rest of the book. It's maddening. It's utterly insane. I read this book twice. I read this cockamamie thing 2 times. He never defines it. Now, the final thing that I want to point out about Kendi's book, and
Okay.
this is indicative of critical race theory as a whole, is that there is never a solution presented.
Shocker.
You never talk about how to solve the problem. 2 reasons why I think that is that we'll get into in a second.
Well, you gotta raise your trophy to show your press. You can't let them actually fix it. Then you don't have a trophy anymore.
For example, right? So I think this is in chapter 3 when he talks about the 2 different types of racism. One racism is segregationist.
Okay. Makes
Segregation
sense.
racism. The other racism is assimilationist,
Wait.
meaning
So because we're all together.
if we're together, means if we're separate, it's racist. But if we're together, also racist.
Oh, all right.
What's the solution?
So you win either way.
What's the solution? I don't know.
It's like saying I
Those two
agree
thi-
and disagree at the same time.
Yeah.
Oh, either way I'm right. Fantastic.
Those 2 things are really your only option.
Yeah.
Right? Really, and this
We're
is
either
where I get it.
Americans
Yeah.
or we're our own little tribes.
And this is where we get into the only thing, then this is the craziest thing. The only thing even remotely like a solution that Kendi presents is something like this.
Oh, no.
And this is something that you and I discussed, and it just blew your mind.
Yeah.
He actually got this from Derek Bell, who's one of the CRT primary authors in 1991, stated the same thing. He says that Brown versus Board of Education was actually a racist decision.
Yeah. No.
Because it was his statement is that the problem with the separate but equal policy wasn't the separate part, it was the equal part.
So you needed to make it more equal,
Yes,
right?
yes. What does that mean? That means that Kendi's ideal society is a bunch of segregated racial communities.
Blacks over here, Hispanics over here, whites over here.
Equally distributed resources by the federal government.
But you stay separate.
But not even that. It's that they all have the equal outcome. So if the black communities need more resources in order to assume the same, in order to follow their cultural practice and have the same results as the white communities, then they should give you more. You should give.
I wonder how he feels about interracial marriages, because I feel like he's probably racist too.
I'd be really surprised. I'd be really interested.
Whoa, this white guy married a black girl, or vice versa.
That'd be
Racist.
super interesting. That'd be super, super interesting. Yes. But that's the closest thing to a solution he comes by, which, by the way, don't accept that as a solution.
No.
Sorry. Won't do that. But he calls
it literally was better once we realized your color doesn't matter. It's all about what's in your brain.
You talked about how we talked earlier about how he just adds words onto other words. And trust me, the next thing we're going to talk about is how he hijacks language, which he does. He basically adds words onto other words to make a qualifier that doesn't make sense. So when he talks about these separate spaces that he wants, right?
Yeah.
He calls them racial inclusive spaces. So he says there would be a black inclusive space and a white inclusive space. I'm sorry, but if the space is exclusively black or exclusively white, it is therefore not inclusive.
Yeah.
You cannot be both inclusive and exclusive, but he puts
Can't
the
have a
qualifier
whites
on
only
there.
sign and go like, yeah, we're inclusive to all
We're
whites.
inclusively whites only? That makes no sense.
That's racist.
That is completely antithetical.
There's a
you
thing we did in the
can't
60s that kind of undid all those signs, thank goodness.
That was racist, though.
Oh, yeah,
that was racist. According to Kendi, that was racist because it didn't focus on the equality. It focused on the separate. No. Sorry. You're garbage. You're garbage at logic, and you're just assuming that people are going to follow you because people are stupid. We're not stupid. If you have any sense and you take any sort of critical reading of this critical race theory book,
the elites are stupid.
It's well, the elites just want to be. They want to be told what to do.
Well, if they keep a controversy going, they
I'm
could
going to
always
quote
be
that
solution.
I'm going to quote that H3 guy. You remember that H3 guy, but the H3 podcast guy that's like, oh man, the CDC just tells you what to do. You don't got to think about it, dude. You don't even got to think about it. They'll just tell you what to do, right?
Done.
That's what the elites want for us. Like, we'll tell you what to do, and you should just do
They know
it.
better.
And that's what Kendi writes his whole book assuming that premise. Okay, next thing. Kendi hijacks language.
No.
He absolutely hijacks language. Again, he does two things. One,
I don't know how hijacks it. You just said a very eloquent and very descriptive definition of racism.
He puts unnecessary qualifiers on words that often result in a complete oxymoron. And then also he redefines words in order to suit his premise. Words that he deliberately misuses. Okay?
Okay.
Racist.
Yeah, we've seen that.
White.
Yeah.
Black.
Okay.
Assimilation. Policy. Equity. Right? Equity's the big one.
Ugh.
Because equity, here's the
We
thing.
need to have the exact same outcome because somehow we can do
But
that.
that's not what equity means. Equity just means justice. It just means fairness.
Yeah, they've hijacked the crap out of that.
But equity, they say, no. Equity is different than equality in that equity means equality of outcome. No, it doesn't. That is not the definition of the word. We have redefined it in order to make that our sort of
square peg
fit that
in
square
that
peg. Yeah.
circle.
He doesn't do that, right? He talks about white, things about white. And the reason why he misuses the word white is because he says that certain black people can have whiteness. No, sorry, doesn't work, right? It says, well, so, black. Basically, white just means bad and black means good in his book.
Oh, there we go.
Assimilation, right? Assimilation means gentrification to him, right? There's, policy, right? Policy means outcome. Right? There is no racist policy, but certain policies have disparate outcomes, and therefore that's a bad policy.
Right.
No,
Oh,
that's just a
gosh.
bad outcome, right? Then the other thing he does is he makes
life.
up words.
No.
He just totally makes up words. Here's an example. Educational suasion is he says, okay, this is a real thing. Inclusive.
When you're sniffing your own farts, you
talked
start making up your own words.
We talked about inclusive racialized spaces, but he uses the word educational suasion, which basically is indoctrination. That's what he means by it, right? He just doesn't
I
want to
never
say
said indoctrination,
He doesn't
guys.
want to say indoctrination because that has a negative tone to it,
then
but he
we
uses
can't let him know the
educational
truth.
suasion. This book is an absolute masterclass in how to use language. And it's also, in my opinion, evidence that language matters, right? When people always talk about pronouns, right? And this is a totally different subject, but it's kind of on the same thread. You talk about pronouns. Nick, why don't you use correct pronouns for transgender people? Because what I say is ultimately what I will believe. You can convince people. If you can convince people to use the words that you want them to use, you can convince them to believe the things that you want them to believe. And that's what this book is doing. Worst thing, and then I promise we're going to get to the solutions because we're running out of time. I'm sorry. It's just, I got a lot to say about this. I got a lot to say about this book. And this is one that's most important to me. Kendi absolutely blasphemes the gospel of Christ.
Oh.
Absolutely. The dude is a 100% blasphemous teacher. He does. He speaks about how his parents were involved in spreading the gospel. But
maybe that's why he changed his last name to his wife's last name.
I'm going to read this directly from my notes because I want to be very clear in what I'm saying, okay? The author states in his second chapter that the gospel of Christ is primarily about the liberation of specific downtrodden groups from earthly oppressors rather than the deliverance from the oppression of all from their own sin. This is a doctrine of black liberation theology. It is a derivative of the prosperity gospel, and it is undoubtedly sending people to hell. You are taking the most important thing in the entire world, the gospel of Christ, right? The power of God unto salvation. And I know that this isn't a religious podcast, but I am a Christian, and this is what I hold. This is where I hold.
This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine.
This is very important to me, okay? I believe that the gospel of Christ Jesus is what sends people to heaven as opposed to hell. I believe that the gospel of Christ Jesus is the salvation of God unto man. And when you twist that, right? When you turn that into something that it is not, and you can believe people that it is, you can make people believe that it is more virtuous to talk about Jesus as some sort of liberator and black theologian, as opposed to Jesus being someone, the God of the universe, who has come here to deliver you, Ibram Kendi, from your sin, not to deliver you from the sin of some white man. When you are teaching that to people, you are sending them to hell, and that really makes me mad. You talk about something that's going to really, well, I will rant and rave forever and ever and ever.
Trust me, I've heard it. This is
where you really get me. You really get my blood boiling, because now you're not just talking about things that are going to give bad ideas in people's brains that will cause problems in modern society. You are now talking about things that is going to cause the damnation of their eternal soul. Ooh. And it's because you are an absolutely selfish, blaspheming, unintellectual halfwit.
I was about to say, keep it G.
I'm trying very, very hard. Who wouldn't understand a political or a philosophical theory if it came up and slapped him in his cheek. You are going to send people to hell because you're telling them that it is more virtuous to consider what has been done to them than what they do in their sin. And it is their sin that is oppressing them. It is not some other external force from which they need to be liberated. And I will tell you this, if you continue with that, that's where I'm going to come after you. And I'm not trying to make any sort of violent claim or anything like this, but I will tell you this. With whatever power I have on this tiny podcast in front of this camera in this room, with whatever I have, I'm going to come straight after you, and I'm going to convince people that this is garbage, because it is, and it's very dangerous. It's not just dangerous to society, because here's the thing, society's going to come and go, I understand.
Yep.
But when you're talking about the mortal souls, the immortal souls of these people who you are going to send directly to hell because of your blasphemy, I will not abide by.
Because you're serving yourself. You're a false prophet. That's what you really are. We've heard this is in the Bible many times, over and over. Watch out for the false prophets. Here's one. This
person is absolutely a false prophet.
Sorry, I know we went a little godly thing there, but like Nick said, we are Christians. We're not going to be ashamed of it. So we are going to talk about it if it does come up. And right now, he makes it very easy for it to come up.
And this is a theological thing. Make no mistake. I mean, CRT is
it's a religion
that people treat theologically.
Whitey bad.
And it's what they use.
See, I always hated whites anyways. Now it just affirms it. So, I mean, finally, it's something affirming my beliefs.
It's what they use for their meaning. It's what they use for salvation. It's what they use for repentance. Everything that we have.
Yeah, for anti-racists, you get I did this and I am super sorry. Please forgive. We forgive thee. Thank you very much. All right, next person.
We have confession.
Yeah.
We have a liturgical calendar.
You got to pay money to BLM. That way you can show you gave to the church.
That's why you have.
Tithe.
You have feast days like Juneteenth and months like Pride Month. You have a liturgical
day
calendar.
of mourning, July 4th.
You have saints. You have a papacy, right? You have martyrs like George Floyd, right?
Oh yeah.
This is a religion, and it is a false religion, and it is going to lead people to hell, and that is what concerns me most out of all of this. So I'm sorry, I needed to insert that there, and I know we try not to be as religious, but I mean, guys, I'm not gonna.
Up. There's no way to
I'm not
go
gonna
around
not
that.
talk about it. I'm sorry. So what can we do about it? And this is really the whole point of all this is we're supposed to be talking about what.
Wait. You're going to offer solutions where Kennedy did not?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Good.
We're going to talk about what the Democrats in Texas, the Texas Democrats, are not doing while they're up there sipping Miller Lite with their buddies in Washington. And one of the things they're not doing is they're not addressing this issue. So how can you engage with this? What can you do in order to keep this? And if I haven't convinced you thus far that this needs to be out of our schools, then I'm sorry. This is a wrong podcast for you because I don't know what else I can do for that.
Yeah.
Because this is anti-historical. It's anti-intellectual. It's
garbage.
It's garbage. It really is. It's and it has no place in our public schools. And that's coming from somebody who's read the literature. Now, what can we do? Number one is vote. Guys, 2022 is coming up real fast. And I foresee, now I've been wrong in what I've foreseen before politically, because I would have bet you a year of my salary that Hillary Clinton would have been the president in 2016, and I was wrong. So I have foreseen wrong, but I foresee a shellacking from the Democrats, especially in the state of Texas. Right? Now, I
was against you a few episodes ago. You said that. I was like, nah, probably not. Well, because there's a little act they did, I think it kind of solidified that even a moderate Democrat going like, well, yeah, GOP may not have it all together, but they at least were there.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with someone who at least makes a stand.
So Texans, go vote. Vote these people
out. Vote them out.
Yeah, vote these people out. And I mean, don't stop at the top of the ticket, guys. I mean, you guys can clearly see that the top of the ticket is...
Well, you got time for the top of the ticket.
Yeah.
You got some time.
Virtually useless, right? But don't stop at just your senators. Don't stop at just your House of Representatives. Go to your state legislatures. Get these people out.
It starts locally.
Yeah, that's super important.
Because I heard this interesting statement, and I was like, wow, that's kind of a good way to see it. If you're advocating in D.C. for something, well, now you're playing defense. You're playing Hail Mary. Like, this is the end of the game. You're down because you've let it go so far. If you handle it locally, well, now you can start doing some trick plays and get some offensive points going.
Yeah.
That's how you do it. You have to keep it local.
DC's the fourth quarter, right?
Yeah.
I always say politics is baseball, not football. Football is about the draft, and baseball is about the farm system. We need to get a bigger farm system. And I think Republicans have done well. We've seen a lot of state legislatures lean Republican. But we need to get some conservative voices in there. Next thing you got to do is read. Now, I know we joke about, oh, Nick, I'm so sorry you had to read this book. Guys, you got to do your homework. If you can't
argue against it if you don't know what the heck's in it.
Yeah.
Don't take his word for it. Read it yourself.
I talk with a lot of people who agree with me but don't have any idea what they're talking about. And those people, in some ways, are more dangerous.
I thought you were going to say those people are Democrats.
Yeah. Okay. Well, those people are in some ways more dangerous than people on the other side.
Yeah.
Right? Because people on the other
side just take your word for it and keep spouting it.
So if you're gonna do this, if you're gonna argue this, take the time to actually read not just what your side says, but what the opposition says. One of the great things about this show, I think, is that we use sources from. We try to favor sources from the other side because we want to take people at their best argument. So do that. Don't just read echo chamber sources.
It'd be easy to find Fox News to get my bias going, but no.
Last thing you got to do is you got to speak up. Now, here's the thing. Us on the conservative side of the aisle, we often have an issue with this, right? We're not nearly as vocal as especially some of the radicals on the left. And the problem is that a lot of the people that are speaking up are people that haven't done the first thing and read their stuff, right? So read, but then speak up. Right? It's like
they start out with a great argument and all of a sudden you start getting this really weird, hold on. Where'd you see this? Internet? Okay, what site? Because this seems like it's BelieveMe.com. Doesn't seem like a real site, man.
Yeah.
I wouldn't start using that as your basis here.
I promise.
I'm totally not lying.org.
I solemnly swear I'm not lying. I swear to drunk I'm not God. No. Don't read the echo chamber sources, but we do need to speak up. And it's the time for complacency and shyness is over. We're talking about our kids. It's plain and simple, right? And one of these days we're going to have a good friend of ours on who is basically took her kids out of the public school system because She can't deal with this. And she's these are my children. These are my children, and these are the people that they're going to grow up to be. I can't have them in there. And her thing was specifically about the way that the modern education system treated Christianity and the gospel. She says, I won't have my kids in a system that's going to indoctrinate them into something that could damage their souls. So she took them out. We need to be at least speaking up at that. It's time to get mad. And I know that I kind of like got a little red face there at the end of the last thing, but I mean, you should be mad. This is a problem, and it's a problem that's worth talking about. So by all means, keep speaking. And the last thing you should do, and this is something maybe for only a select few people, but we need more, run.
Oh, see ya.
Yeah, no, not run.
Oh.
Not that run.
Oh.
Run for office.
Oh.
You know, you talked about the farm
Be
system.
specific, Nick. Yeah. I was ready to do a run.
You talked about the farm system. It doesn't mean run for president. Run for school board.
Yeah.
Right. We need more people. We need more like-minded people on the school boards that are going to get people out of this. Now, thankfully, we have a lot of those people on a lot of Texas school boards.
Oh, people are speaking up and waking up now. They are pissed.
But go, run. And you don't have to run for representative, state rep. You don't. Run for
you don't have to know all the things
Yeah.
either. People's like, well, I have to be more accomplished. No, that's the beauty of our republic. One for Texas, the other for America. But you don't have to be this professional, this assistant manager. All right, now you're ready for manager. All right, now you're ready for like district manager. Like, no, you can literally just go and do it. You don't have to have some kind of resume to do it. There's a lot of people who run our state who beforehand were just a manager, just a business owner. They just took what they knew there and applied it in a way that's like, well, this kind of makes sense in a business. Maybe I can apply it this way.
You don't have to run for governor day one.
No.
You really don't.
You can. Probably not going to go well for
yeah,
you,
exactly.
but you can. It's a lot of money.
But there are smaller things, smaller roles that you can play that will make a difference.
Yeah.
And making a little bit of a difference is a big thing, right?
You can't be that person who rips the mountain. Maybe you're the one who just kind of tills the land to help someone rip the mountain. Come on.
And remember, you think I'm only one person, but I always go back to our image about the stars at night, right? One star doesn't produce a lot of light, but all of them together, right? If they all begin that process and that change, you can shift from darkness into light. Because let me assure you guys, this CRT in our schools is nothing but darkness. But we are the stars at night, and in Texas, the stars at night
are big and bright.
We'll see you next week.